After you have upgraded, oh, by the way, now this is also very important. So let's pretend that I haven't upgraded yet, and I haven't upgraded to 7.0, and I have a virtual machine that's either running or it's paused or it's in hibernation. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that I pause this thing and I decide I want to pause this machine. So I pause it and then I put it to sleep, right? I close the window and I say save the machine state. If it's paused and the machine state is saved, or if it's running and I unins some students basically just download the stuff and load it, even though this virtual machine is running. So you have old 6.1.34, 36, 38 components running. It's like trying to fix the car while you're rolling down the highway. It doesn't end well, right? So the first part of the process with VirtualBox is to gracefully shut down anything that has a saved machine state, anything that's been paused, anything that's hibernating, anything that's running. You turn it all off and then you close the VirtualBox manager, right? And instead of loading direct, instead of loading 7 right on top of 6, what you do in control panel under programs and features is you select your VirtualBox environment. And well, in this case, it says 7.0 because I've already done it. But if it says 6.1.38, you're going to uninstall it and then you're going to want to reboot your system. So you want to remove the old version completely and reboot your system before you install 7.0, after you've shut down your virtual machines and everything else, right? Now, if you don't, what you're going to get is scrambled eggs. So you'll get a server that won't start, you'll get errors, it'll say it can't load the server, all these weird things start happening if you're rushed in a hurry. So that may sound familiar, but the good news is there is still a way to fix this, okay? Now, let's get back to the guest editions. We said that when you're running, when you update the virtual, I mean, the extensions, when you update the extension pack, that gives you a chance to also load on the virtual machine side of things. So inside the virtual machine, you need to insert the guest editions CD image, and you need to run Windows Update. So you do this first, and it's going to, this thing will pop out and it'll say, hey, it's installing an image. And there might be another pop out down here that says, what do you want to do with this thing when your disk is inserted, right? So in just a minute, we might see something. Another nasty thing that happens with 7.0 virtual machines is that the screen goes black after it's sitting a time. And to get that back, oh, wow. So I was loading Windows updates in the background. Does everybody recall that the screen showed I was running Windows updates on the server itself? So evidently one of those updates forces a spontaneous reboot. So I'm going to go back into my server here. I can finish this thing. You're probably thinking, oh, I'm so glad this is happening to the instructor because they won't believe me when I'm having my problems. So essentially, yeah, so what would we put here for a problem ID? I'd say something like 003 spontaneous update reboot. That's usually what I put for a memo. I'm gonna shut this. I don't want this showing. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just went to the trouble of prompting a Windows update, but I had already inserted the guest editions. you're gonna want to do both. You're gonna want to go to the devices and insert the guest editions disk. And if it doesn't pop up spontaneously into File Explorer, you can open File Explorer and just click on the disk drive. And it should show in here. Don't tell me it's rebooting again. Oh, okay. So one of the fun things about a major version increase is if it's a .0, another adage in the industry is, don't install a 1.0 or any .0 because they're still working the kinks out. I'm going to go ahead and shut this machine down gracefully because I'm going to show you a workaround here. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into I'm going to log in and just do a shutdown from within the system itself. And you see that the guest editions CD is really having a problem here loading properly, and that could be because of the hardware on the back end, and I'll explain in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'll just cancel this. And if I go and look in my File Explorer, I may or may not see a D drive. See? So I inserted the disk, but I don't see a D drive. And that's telling me that I have a misfire here with the hardware. So so this happens sometimes as you're upgrading. You upgrade on the host with the, you shut down all your virtual machines, then you upgrade your version of your hypervisor, in this case, VirtualBox, and then you may get some glitches. And so it's good that we're seeing this because I want to show you the remedy. If this machine should have a disk drive, by that I mean a D drive, a CD or a DVD drive in the mix, and that's how the machine is configured. But when I go ahead and I load the device with a guest edition CD image, it doesn't take. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. And this is a planned shutdown, so I wouldn't get the little pop-up that says, why did this shut down? Another thing that made this humorous or hilarious is that I was trying to demonstrate something at the same time I was still loading Windows Server 2022 updates on the virtual machine in the background, and one of those forced a spontaneous reboot. So that's another reason why you can see challenges to this process is that you can have updates that are posting to the host machine on your laptop or PC, and if those force a spontaneous reboot while you're in the process of updating on the virtual machines, that gets disrupted. So you get these half-baked loads. And at some point, you just don't want to throw all your work away. So I don't think it's a bad thing that we're having some hiccups here because I can demonstrate these other methods. How long should you wait for this thing to shut down gracefully? Hang on a sec. Is everybody there?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I've done so far is closed my virtual machines, powered my virtual machines off. And I powered my virtual machines off and done the major version upgrade here. After I've closed down all the virtual machines, and you just saw that sometimes it takes a minute or two. You just got to be patient and you got to wait. Now, if it doesn't close after, say, 5 minutes, you can close the window for the virtual machine and it'll ask, what do you want to do? Save the machine state, send an ACPI shutdown, or power off. And what you want to do is send an ACPI update, and then that's going to signal, that's like using the menu off of your start to shut down, or it's like pressing Control Alt Delete and selecting shutdown. ACPI is the proper software way of shutting things down. If that doesn't work, you can power it off, and that's like pulling the plug out of the wall. And that's a little more forceful, but sometimes machines get stuck. Again, you wouldn't want to do that until after you've attempted an ACPI prompted shutdown and 5 minutes have passed. Now, if I look in here under my settings, under storage, I should have a disk that would accept an image. See, I should be able to accept an image in my disk tray, and it should be empty. When I insert the guest editions, I should see the contents of that guest edition CD, and that's on the virtual machine side. That is the manifestation of the VirtualBox extensions. So when you update VirtualBox extensions and you insert the guest edition CD, it's pulling the guest editions drivers from the extensions out of VirtualBox as if it were a disk to upgrade your device drivers, right? And every now and then you have one that just quits working properly, or you have a machine altogether that just quits working properly. No matter what you do, it just doesn't want to work right. And here's something that you can do to restart the whole process. You can essentially pull the virtual disk away from this machine now that it's powered off. And then you can rebuild the virtual machine if you know the specifics, like, okay, how many processors do I have? I'm using 1 CPU. I was using 4 gigs of RAM. I disabled the floppy. My optical disk is the second, or was it the first? Maybe it was the first in the boot order. Originally, it might have been the first, but I disabled floppy. My display was set to VBox SVGA, and I had 3D acceleration enabled, and I had this maxed out. My network card was set to bridged. As long as I know the settings of the machine that I had, what I can do.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
So I have those same settings for my network, but for some reason my virtual machine won't connect to the internet.
Right. Well,
Same here.
yes. Well, here's what we've been seeing. When 7 came out, it included a Windows client for virtual machines. See how this says 2019? When you're first setting up your virtual machine, you select, it'll default to Windows 10, and you hit a pull down and you select the highest version of server software that's available, right? Previously, in version 6.1.38, the highest version you could select was 2019. But now you can select 2022. So there's a good reason to go ahead and rebuild your machine altogether anyway. So what I'm going to do is close this. And I'm gonna remove this. And I can delete all files or I can remove only. Now it's safer to remove only and then rebuild your machine. In worst case scenarios, you can delete all the files, but what you should do first is kind of move your virtual hard disk. So on my C drive, I have two folders. I have a VM folder and a VHD folder. Your mileage may vary. You may only have a VM folder and your VDI, your virtual disk is embedded inside, right? And for the server install, I created a separate directory called VHD. And basically I can slide this over to temp real quick. So now it's in my temp folder. Does everybody see what I did there?
Yeah.
So it's like reaching into your server hardware and removing the hard disk and saying, okay, I'm going to transplant my disk into a new machine. In the physical world, in data centers, you can have motherboards and memory modules and stuff, power supplies, network cards fry. But if the disk is good, you pull the disk out, you get them to ship you a replacement platform, and then you plug the disk in and away you go, right? Now it may wake up and say, hey, I'm sensing some differences here. And there are some screens you walk through. So that's essentially what we're going to do here, only we're going to do it in the virtual world. Is everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
So this is the equivalent of yanking the physical hard disk out. And now I'm going to go back. I'm going to close this window and I'm going to go back into my Oracle. And I'm going to delete this because it's wonky, it's ill-behaved, and I'm going to say delete all files. And I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to close my virtual box, and then I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to go into my VM folder, and I want to make sure that there's no Win Server STD folder there. And I don't have this in here. I am going to do one more thing too. I'm going to open up my virtual box, and in my let's see, where is it? It's not showing the option here. Okay, so this new version has used to hit the file menu and there were, oh, tools, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, the new version has some differences in the GUI. What I'm looking for is the virtual media manager. And I want to make sure that my VDI for the server is not listed here, okay? So when I moved it and I destroyed the server virtual machine, I want to make sure that my virtual disk is not listed here. That's just a double check that if it's still showing, it means that I have some stray files or pointers somewhere. Might help to do a reboot. Let's see. We have everybody present, don't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So let's recap. At this point, I have deleted the machine, but I've moved my hard disk to a temp folder just to get it out of the way when I deleted everything because I want to keep this. I'm going to slide it back into the VHD directory. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do now is go into here and add the VHD so it's available to build a new virtual machine. So my hard disk is still intact. If I were to open this up, and actually if I used VHD or VHDX as a format, I could literally open it up inside Disk Manager in Windows as if I could open up a hard drive and see inside it. You know, I could extract directories or files right out of there. So this is a container file, and I can open it up just like an ISO or a VHD file. VDI is the proprietary format for VirtualBox. So I'm going to go ahead and open this so that it appears here as an available disk. And notice the name, Win SVR STD-C, okay? So now I have this in here. And I'm going to go back to machines and create a new machine. And I'm in expert mode. Originally, it comes up like this, but I'm going to click expert mode because I want to specify a few more things. So I'm going to use the same name. That's one reason why I named the virtual disks the way I do, because if I ever have to rebuild these, I want the exact same name. When this disk is plugged into a new virtual machine, it's going to wake up and go, where am I? And it's going to want to see the same reference. So I'm going to see Win, I'm going to type Win SVR STD. And the folder where I want the virtual machine built is VM. But notice here, it says Windows 10. And I'm going to scroll down, and now I see Windows 2022 as an option. So this is the first time that Windows 2022 is offered as an operating system feature in the range of versions for Windows that are in there. So so that's going to be a good thing. You're going to want to put 2022 because we know that our virtual disk, our hard disk, was used to build a server 2022 standard edition, right? Under hard disk, instead of create a virtual hard disk, I'm going to use an existing one. And I'm going to hit the pull down and select Win SRV STD-C, right? Under hardware, I'm going to increase the memory to 4096 because that's what I had before. And I don't want my server waking up and saying, hey, what happened to my memory, right? So altogether, I have this pinned. I have the RAM in there previously. The only difference between my previous virtual machine and this virtual machine is that I'm explicitly stating 2022. I'm going to say finish. And now I'm going to go into my network and change it to bridged. Okay. I'm also going to go into display and make sure that I have max memory. It says VBox SVGA. I'm going to select this. What else am I going to do? I'm going to disable floppy. So that should be it. Bridged. Make sure the display is the same. Let's look at storage. I have an empty disk. Now I could look for an ISO and choose a disk file. You can actually download the guest editions ISO for different platforms so that you can physically insert and choose a disk file for the guest editions. There's a place on the VirtualBox website. And if worse comes to worse, that's what we'll do to work around this. If we can't get the disk tray to load the guest editions properly. Why is that so important? We have a whole version of VirtualBox higher that we're running this with. And we want to make sure both the host and the virtual machine are on the same page when it comes to the drivers that are being used. hopefully after we rebuild this, we won't have a problem. I'm going to say okay, and now I can start this. Any questions so far?
No.
So I've basically tossed all the other digital components of a server, kept the hard disk, and I'm creating a whole new machine, basically. Now, if I press start, it's going to power up the virtual machine. And hopefully, if the boot order prompts activity with the CD, that'll wake up the CD or DVD drive. I'll go ahead and close this stuff. And it should wake up as if it were just fine. The fact that it said getting devices ready for a second, did everybody see that? Did they catch that? Once again, if you leave your virtual machine for a minute and you walk off, the screen will turn black and you have to use the input and the Control-Alt-Delete in order to get a login prompt. That's been throwing a lot of students. They're like, oh, I upgraded to 7.0, but my screen's black and I click on it and I can't do anything. And they click on it and then they hit enter on their keyboard. And what they have to do is this in order to get it to wake up. My login still works. It's still loading my profile. It's as if Dell rolled a technician with a brand new hardware server, and all he did was take the disk drives out, physically plug them into the new system, and take out the bad system, right? Physically. That's the physical equivalent of what we've just done virtually. So now Server Manager is going to come up. Do I have a D drive that's empty? We'll find out in a second. Still don't have a D drive. Maybe if we try to insert the disk, it'll prompt for the D drive. If I click local server, I should see my computer name and my work group. Eventually, I'll see my IP address and I'll see my product ID and all that other stuff there. Should have the same time zone. Everything should be identical. Is it just me, or are we seeing a little bit of weirdness up here in with the graphics? Just a little bit. There we go. Eventually we see everything once it finally finishes populating. So I can prompt for updates, and if my bridged machine is working, if my bridged adapter is working properly, it should show something on the screen in the way of updates. And there you see, oh, so this could account for some of the weirdness that we've been seeing with our guest edition CD and other things that are going on. If the Windows update was loading and partially implemented, then I need to complete that process. And so it's iterative. Sometimes you have to push on one side and on the other. I could try to insert the disk while I'm running Windows Update, and that might work. And then again, it might confuse the virtual machine. So I did click install now, and it's supposed to be updates are ready to install. Let's minimize this and see what happens. I'm gonna try to insert the guest image edition and see if that doesn't complete the process properly. And if it hangs, my workaround is I'm going to shut the server down after the updates are finished posting. After these updates are finished loading, I'll go ahead and remove the DVD disk, and then I'll replace the DVD disk. What am I talking about? Here in settings, under storage, I can basically remove this drive, and then I can add a drive to the SATA controller. Or I can add a different controller. I can add a SCSI controller and add a disk, a DVD disk drive to the SCSI controller, and sometimes that will, sometimes that'll help. So it says the machine settings were changed while you were editing them. You currently have unsaved setting changes. Would you like to reload the changed settings or keep your own changes? I'm going to keep my own changes and say okay. And here it says aborted, right? So evidently the virtual machine doesn't like that. Let's go to VirtualBox. And then download. And then guest editions. Is there a guest editions? I saw somewhere there was a guest editions. Ah, well, that's from a previous version though. It says guest editions cannot be installed in Windows. That's from earlier this year. This one's more current. Let me try this remedy first. So I'm going to go into storage. I'm going to remove this. Everybody see this?
Yeah.
I'm going to remove it. Now I'm not removing the hard disk. I just removed the removable CD/DVD tray. And I can do one of two things. I can add a new one. I can say, okay. And then I can add a new one to the same controller, right? So add a hard disk, add an optical drive, or I can add a controller. I think what I want to do is add a controller, and I'd like to use like a SCSI controller. SCSI is like a very traditional legacy version of a hard disk controller that was designed and used a lot in servers. And so now I'm going to add an optical drive Everybody see this?
Yeah.
See how it's giving me the option to add a guest editions ISO?
Yep.
That's probably going to resolve our issue. Probably. Sometimes you have to go at it more than once. If you try creating a new removable disk in the SATA with the SATA controller, for some reason or another with my laptop, it may not like my host hardware. That's why I like using SCSI to solve problems like this. So now I have my guest edition CD. Let's look at when the boot, it boots first to optical and then to hard disk. I know my hard disk is good. I don't want it to boot to optical where the guest edition CD is, and I don't want that to say it's a non-bootable disk. So I'm going to say, okay. I want to check my other settings too. Network, make sure nothing else has changed. I'm still unbridged. I'm still good with my display. Everything else looks good. So now I'm going to try this again and see what happens. And hopefully this substitution of the virtual component will be enough of a change where we won't have this error anymore. Now, I have a question for you. Let's pretend that none of this works. Let's pretend that I go through the trouble of upgrading my hypervisor environment to 7.0, and I download the extensions. I've checked my hashes to make sure I have legitimate downloads and everything's working. I can't get my virtual server to work right no matter what I do. What is your final fallback option? All right, let me recast the question. I've used my VirtualBox environment, and I've performed the equivalent of hardware component changes as if I were standing in a data center and I were working with a physical machine. So, you know, a delivery truck rolls up, a brand new server, except for the hard drives, is delivered. The Dell technician for the Dell PowerEdge server says, okay, where do you want this set up? They pull the old machine, they put the new machine in, you insert the hard disk, you go through all these difficulties. You get hardware incompatibilities when you try to boot the thing. The Dell technician says, okay, well, I have spare disk controllers. We'll use different disk controllers. We'll get this working one way or another. Let's say that you get to the end of this process and everything fails and you still don't have a server that's stable. What is your final step to resolve this permanently? Well, let's pretend I tell you that you need your server virtual machine in order to be able to complete solutions 3, 4, and 5. What are you going to do? Are you just going to send an email that says, well, my virtual machine is hosed and I've tried everything and I took all the steps that you demonstrated in class. I followed the recording and it still doesn't work. It still crashes. It's still not stable. It's still not working. How many of you are using a laptop that's a year old or less? Hello?
Yeah, I have a PC, not a laptop.
You have a PC. Is it a year old or less?
Uh, it's rather new. I wouldn't say it's older than a year.
It, so right at about a year. Okay. Well, um, you do know that desktop clients have hard drives that aren't built to the same specifications as server hard drives, right? Maybe.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. If you go to websites like Amazon or Newegg or CDW and you want to buy hard disks for a server, those are called enterprise hard disks. They're designed for the corporate environment and they're designed for servers. So if you buy a server grade hard drive, you'll pay about 15% more for it, right? You'll pay let's say you buy a 2 terabyte server hard disk as opposed to a desktop, you'll pay $15 more. So you pay $75 instead of $60. What you get is something that's 100 times more reliable because they use better components and they use better media, and the spinning disk sectors are coated with better quality assurance on the magnetic surface so that the heads are more reliable, all those things, right? Anywhere from 10 to 100 times more reliable. Yeah. The point I'm trying to make is that if everything else fails, what do? You still have the ISO that you downloaded from the Microsoft downloads, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we built a virtual hard disk and we used your laptop or PC physical hard drive to create a virtual hard drive for a server. And what we're doing here is using client technology to simulate like data center server grade stuff. Is it possible that laptop hard drives and desktop PC hard drives that you can get some data corruption and stuff, right? If if the answer to that is yes, it's in a worst case scenario, you can take the ISO, you can rebuild your server and just recreate another server, another virtual machine from scratch. It doesn't take a terrible amount of time to rebuild a machine from scratch compared to trying to troubleshoot one that's already in existence. Sometimes you have to start over from scratch. That's the reality of the technical environment we live in nowadays. I'm going to go ahead and try this to see what happens, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and log in and see if my new disk controller works. If it did the trick. So did you buy your own PC, Tommy, or did you build it?
So I bought it from a friend who built it himself.
Ah, okay. And it's a year or less.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So do you know what the components are?
Like the specs.
Yeah.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them.
I could check the about screen. I
Yeah,
think I know the graphics card and the processor and the RAM.
so you see what I'm doing here when I'm just making up a problem ID. It's my own convention. But we've been having wonky problems with our machine. So when it shuts down or crashes, I'm gonna put, okay, hardware component changes. I'm gonna put something about what I'm doing in that log, and that's just gonna help me in terms of my overall result. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm still getting these weird gibberish in my graphic elements unless I mouse over them. Could be that 7.0 is a little buggy and they need to fix some things at VirtualBox before they do this. If I open up my File Explorer, I should, now that I have the hardware in place, I should be able to go to my device and insert the guest edition CD image because it's queued up in the hardware settings, right? And hopefully the SCSI controller is more stable. So we'd have a better result. If it's loading properly, let me check this to see if it's still in there. Yeah, I still have my guest editions ISO in the mix in the controller. So yeah, if this went black because it's rebooting, we've got a bug. And I would rebuild my ISO. I'd rebuild my server using my ISO in a new environment with 7.0. Yep, there you have it. So my final fallback to resolve this situation is to use my install media, my server 2022 download. I would delete everything at this point, including the hard disk. And I would go ahead and rebuild my virtual machine from scratch using updated install media. One thing you can check in our environment is to see if we have a new version of 2022 available, because there may be a new version of 2022 available. So let's see if the version is the same or if it's different. I have my ISO media on a different USB thumb drive, but I can put it on here real quick and then I'll rebuild. Welcome back, Deanna.
Thank you.
So Deanna, we used the SATA controller and we did not get a stable result when we tried to install the image. It basically crashed again. So what I'm going to do is shut this down. Meanwhile, I am checking to see if there's a new version of the software 2022 download, just to see if the same ISO is there or not. And I think that's the same one, isn't it? Ends in D7EAC.ISO. Yeah, that's the same. It hasn't been updated yet, so I'll go ahead and stop this because I already have a copy of that on a thumb drive. I want to go ahead and try using the other option for another SATA controller just to see if that behaves better. So I'm going to go ahead and so Deanna, while you were offline, we asked the question, what would you do if everything else failed so you'd get your virtual machine back? And the answer was, you'd get the install media, you would delete everything completely, including the virtual disk. You'd just wipe the VDI and you'd reload with your install media. You'd rebuild another virtual machine. Doesn't take a terrible amount of time, but push come to shove, that's your final recourse. Okay? Does that?
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's just like remaking the machine itself, basically,
Yes.
or
Yes, exactly. So it didn't like the SCSI. Didn't like the SCSI option or the guest CD. It could be that the guest edition CD is half baked and they rushed it when they put out 7.0. If I go here and I go back out to Google and say VirtualBox 7.0 guest editions not working. This is from 2019. So there are other troubleshooting options we can explore. But in general, whenever you have a whole version upgrade, it's not uncommon to have to rebuild a guest system, a guest virtual machine uh, from a new platform, right? The same is true for the feature release. Is everybody familiar with what's referred to as a new feature update? So 2.1H2 was the latest feature update for Windows 10. The OS build as a whole is 19.044, but sometime later this season, Microsoft will come out with a feature update for Windows 10, and it replaces everything in the operating system, the kernel, from the kernel on up. So this base number will change. When that happens, sometimes you get disconnects between the virtual machines and the host operating systems, and it requires a little bit of research. If you're doing this in a company and you want to make sure that you transition smoothly to new versions, it's not uncommon for organizations or corporations to create a test bench environment and walk through this stuff ahead of time to make sure that you don't have system crashes and showstoppers, right? So it says getting Windows ready, don't turn off your computer. I was going to try the SATA, another SATA controller, and try to put the disk in there. Now, I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. Tommy, would you have a couple of minutes to show me your bridged adapter and let's look at it?
Yeah, I could, let me see if I can share